Hi, so for today's video I decided to talk about familiar spirits. I will include a bit of history, what are familiar spirits and ways that you can work with one, as well as book recommendation. So I've read 2 books on familiar spirits that I really enjoyed, and one of them is The Crooked Path, an introduction to traditional witchcraft, and it's written by Gemma Gary. And it's not a book only about familiar spirits, but you can find a section with a bit of information about familiars as well. I also liked The Witch's Familiar, but not as much as The Crooked Path. And then I have another book that is called Cunning Folk and Familiar Spirits. But I can't give an opinion on this book just because I didn't finish reading it. If any of you do know this book, I would like to know your opinion on it. So there are numerous references on familiar spirits in the old laws that prohibited witchcraft and even in the Bible itself. In the Bible, we can find that familiars were given by the devil to aid witches in their magical workings. In the 16th century, William Forbes, a Scottish lawyer, wrote that to some, the devil gives certain spirits or imps to correspond with and serve them as their familiars, known to them by some odd names to which they answer when called. And these spirits were believed to come in a shape of an animal such as dog, cat, toad, bird or mouse, based on the descriptions that were given by suspected witches about their familiars, led persecutioners to interpret them as physical creatures. And from this interaction, many even today think that familiar spirits are their own pets. And although pets can be wonderful companions in classical folklore and modern traditional witchcraft, are not physical pets but rather spirits and entities that don't reside in our plane. The term familiar spirit is an umbrella term that covers a variety of spirits and entities who act as a witch's attendant. It could be angels, demons, our ancestors, fairies, and so on. Familiar spirits can choose to show themselves in a form of an animal, but it can also choose a form of an animal that is not natural to our own world. And this information is based on the confessions of the suspected witches, such as Elizabeth Clark, who was tried in 1645. She had a familiar named Vinegar Tom, who resembled a greyhound with the head of an ox. Annie Heard, who was also tried in the 1582, admitted to having 6 familiars who looked like cows but were the size of rats. For Alice Keitler, who was also tried, she had a familiar that looked like a dark man named Robin Artisan, to whom she made sacrifices at the crossroads. Bessie Dunlop, however, had a familiar spirit named Tom Reid, was described as an elderly man with a grey beard and dressed in a grey coat with matching breeches. His head was covered with a black bonnet and he carried with him a white wand. It was thought that Alice's familiar was thought to be a demon and Bessie's familiar was thought to be the ghost of a man who had died in battle 25 years before she met him. It is also possible for familiars to shift forms between animals and humans as they so choose. The word familiar derives from Latin familiaris, which can refer to a servant or an intimate acquaintance. Sometimes the relationship between a witch and a familiar will manifest in the capacity of master and servant, but often it's more of a close relationship or an equal partnership. For their aid, the witches would give different types of offerings to their familiars. Throughout history, we find that the witches would give them their own blood, as it is thought that it contains one's life force that provides them with sustenance, and by granting them a part of yourself, you would strengthen the bond between you and your familiar. I do feel a bit nervous to talk about this, knowing that a part of my audience is quite young. Just know that You can also give other types of offerings to your familiar, such as different types of food, maybe water, incense, your own energy. It all depends on the agreement between you and your familiar. Most of them won't typically ask things that they know you cannot offer, but if it does happen, just know that communication is key and you can tell them, look, I cannot offer you what you're asking me, but I can offer you this instead. And if at the end he's still not happy, then probably you should find another familiar. I heard that some practitioners would give them offerings in a form of just talking to them every day or every week or whenever you agreed to. I personally never did any offerings in form of blood, although I know it can be very powerful and some practitioners do it. I personally rather stay safe than sorry, it's just not my type of practice. In return for these offerings, a familiar could help you with spells and rituals. They can either add their power to your own or even teach you new ideas or skills. In the case of Bessie Dunlop, her familiar informed her of which herbs to use in healing her sick neighbors. And Janet Randall confessed in the 15th century that she would pray to her familiar spirit to help her heal the sick and also bring misfortune upon those who refused her alms. So familiar are ready to help in positive but also in negative magical workings. Familiar spirits can also help in divination workings as well as finding lost or stolen goods. They can also relay information about events happening far away, which means that they could travel in places where maybe you can't go so that they can gather information for you. Familiar spirits can also help us in astral travel. They could give protection as well as guide us on the astral plane, as this is their home, so they are very familiar with it. And this can be very helpful if you are interested in astral travel. Based on folkloric accounts, there are 3 ways of obtaining a familiar spirit. So a witch might be gifted a familiar spirit by the witch father after undergoing an initiatory experience. There is one woman accused of witchcraft in 1645 named Mother Lakeland confessed that after she had signed the Devil's Book, he had given her 3 familiar spirits, 2 little dogs and a mole. Johanne Wallis was tried a year later and she said that the man in black had sent her 2 familiars named Grisel and Greedygut, who came in the likeness of dogs. The second way is to inherit one from another individual, such as family members. And we have Elizabeth Francis, another suspected witch from Chelmsford, that was said to have received a familiar from her grandmother. According to some legends, a witch had to first pass on their familiar before they could die in peace. And it's said that if they weren't giving away properly, familiars would hide in hedgerows, waiting for a witch to pass and hopefully to adopt them. And there are also cases in which a familiar would appear to a witch. And in many of these cases, familiars would appear when a witch was in some kind of distress. When Tom Reid came to Bessie Dunlop, she had lost her cow and her husband and child was very ill. There are also other encounters through history. I just don't want to make this video way too long. So if you would like to work with a familiar spirit, you should ask a few questions before getting one. And this is going to help you to find one that is best for you and your practice. You should think about what kind of relationship would you like to have with your familiar. For example, to act as a mentor, a friend, and so on. What exactly would you like your familiar to help you with? What kind of offerings you are willing to give in exchange for their help? For how long would you like to work with your familiar? How would you like to reach out to your familiar when you need him? And also think about how much time do you have to give your familiar. And by that I mean some familiars require a lot of communication and attention, so you should really be honest with yourself, because not everyone is able able to have one just for this reason. But there are some familiars that are more independent. However, you should really think about all those questions because it will help you a lot in getting the right familiar. It's going to help you to find one faster because you know what you're looking for. So I never worked with a familiar spirit because when I attempted to search for one, I actually got a reply from a deity, and at the time I wasn't well prepared for it. Long story short, I did wanted to get to know this deity more, and I do have a lot of respect for her even now. But I made a mistake, and that led to her giving me a nightmare, I guess, to let me know that what I did was not respectful. And by the way, it's a dark deity. I'm not sure she would want me to give a lot of details about my experience with her. I guess I just got scared and let everything go and forget about my initial plan, which was to find a familiar spirit. So one way that you can do it is to do what I would do, and is to send a message to the spirit realm. And you have to have a lot of patience until you get to meet the right familiar for you. What I will do is write a message on a piece of paper along with some offerings and send it to the other world. Then you have to do a lot of meditation or pay attention to your dreams or spend a lot of time in nature so that you can get to meet your familiar. It all depends on your preferences and how you choose to communicate with the familiar spirits, because each of us is different and our practice is unique to us. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below regarding this topic. If you would like to support this channel, you can always check my Etsy shop. Let me know if you have any video ideas like this video so that more people can see it. Subscribe if you would like to see more witchcraft content, and see you in my next one.